She told me to leave her alone, said she didn't need help, didn't want company, but something in her eyes told me otherwise. So every Friday I came back not to fix her, just to be there in case she wanted someone to stay. Elena Marks didn't like people in her house. She especially didn't like strangers with tool belts, loud voices, and the kind of confidence that meant they were going to comment on her mess, her wiring, or God help her personal life. So when she opened her front door to find a man at least a decade too young, with paint on his knuckles and a crooked smile that looked far too comfortable for a Tuesday morning, she almost shut it again. "Morning," he said, adjusting the strap of his tool bag. "Lucas Reyes, you called about the sink. I didn't call anyone," Elena replied flatly, though she did remember reluctantly that her neighbor Diane had promised to take care of it. She hadn't thought Diane meant sending over some handyman who looked like he belonged in a dating app ad. "She said you wouldn't call," Lucas said unfazed. "Said you'd try to live with the drip until the whole house flooded." Elena sighed and stepped back, letting the door creak open just enough for him to pass. "Fine. Kitchen's to the left. Don't touch anything else." Lucas stepped inside and she could already feel her sanctuary being disturbed. The faint scent of sawdust and lemon-scented cleaner followed him in. He walked like someone who knew how to belong in any space, even ones where he clearly didn't. The kitchen sink had been leaking for weeks, but Elena had become so accustomed to the quiet plink-plink that it felt like part of the background noise, like the distant hum of the refrigerator or the low creak of the old floorboards. Lucas crouched under the sink without a word. She hovered nearby, arms crossed, tapping her fingers against her elbow. "You always this talkative?" he asked from beneath the counter. "I like quiet." "Well, I like music," he replied, reaching into his bag and pulling out a wrench. "But I don't judge people for not bursting into song every 5 minutes." She narrowed her eyes, but he couldn't see it. Or maybe he could. Maybe he just didn't care. "Shouldn't take long," he added, half his body swallowed under the sink. "This house is older than I thought, though. The pipes are from a whole other century." Elena couldn't help herself. "Built in 1914, Craftsman original fixtures." Lucas whistled. "That explains the personality. A little grumpy, but kind of charming." Elena blinked. "Are you talking about the house or me?" He didn't answer, just kept working, which somehow irritated her more. After a few minutes, he emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. "Fixed. The gasket was corroded, replaced it. No more drips." She nodded stiffly. "Send the bill to Diane." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Sure, but just so you know, your porch lights flickering and the banisters loose on the front steps." "I don't need more help. Didn't say you did." He slung the bag over his shoulder. "Just thought I'd mention it, in case you decide you like safe porches." She followed him to the door, already anticipating the quiet when he left. But before he stepped out, he paused. "I'll be back Friday," he said casually. "I didn't ask you to come back. You didn't ask me to come today either," he said, flashing her that annoying smile again. "But here we are." Then he was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of metal and soap and the sound of a kitchen sink that had finally stopped dripping. Friday came. Elena told herself she wouldn't be home, that she'd go for a walk or to the bookstore or maybe just stay in her bedroom and not answer the door. But at 10:03 a.m., there was a soft knock, 3 short raps. She waited, then sighed, then opened the door. Lucas stood there with a screwdriver in one hand, a coil of wire in the other. "Brought a new bulb. Thought I'd check that porch light." She didn't answer, just turned and walked back inside. That was as close to permission as he was going to get. He was quick, efficient, barely said a word until the bulb was fixed and the screwdriver was tucked away again. He said this place could be beautiful. Just needs a little love. It's a house, not a pet." Lucas chuckled. "Right. But houses are kind of like people. You ignore the cracks too long, eventually something breaks." She looked at him, then really looked. There was no flirtation in his tone, no sales pitch, just a quiet observation. And maybe, just maybe, a little sadness tucked behind his warm brown eyes. "Don't you have other clients?" she asked. "I do. So why are you here again?" Lucas shrugged. "Because I like fixing things, and because Diane said you wouldn't call, even if the roof caved in." Elena rolled her eyes. "She talks too much. She cares." Elena didn't respond. That silence stretched for a moment. Then Lucas reached for the door. "See you next Friday." She opened her mouth to protest, but he was already gone. The next Friday, he came with a can of wood sealant and a plan to fix the squeaky back gate. The one after that, it was the mailbox hinge, then the gutter. Every time she told herself not to let him in, and every time she did. She didn't offer coffee, not at first, but on the fourth visit, when he came in shivering from a surprise spring storm, she wordlessly placed a chipped mug on the counter. Black, no sugar. He took it like a truce. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them wasn't sharp anymore. It felt more like a pause than a wall. One afternoon, he spotted the bookshelves in the hallway lined with old, well-loved titles. "You're a reader?" he asked. She nodded. "Used to be an editor." Used to Elena's expression, shuddered. "Retired." Lucas studied her for a second too long, then changed the subject. "You ever read Steinbeck?" once she said. "Didn't care for him." "Too dusty." He laughed. "Never heard that critique before." She tilted her head. "Well, now you have." That night, as Elena stood by the window watching the porch light glow steady for the first time in years, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't so bad having someone around once a week. Even if he was persistent, even if he smiled too easily, even if he noticed the cracks she worked so hard to ignore. Friday mornings were becoming complicated. Elena Marks had once prided herself on predictability. She liked her tea at 7:45 a.m., her crossword by 9, and her silence for the rest of the day. She didn't do surprise visits. She didn't do small talk. And she certainly didn't do charming 20-something handymen with paint-stained fingers and sunshine baked into their voices. But there was Lucas Reyes again at 10:01 a.m., holding a small can of paint and grinning like he was right on time. "Notice the trim around your windows is chipping," he said. "Thought I'd touch it up before it gets worse." Elena stood in the doorway and her thick cardigan arms folded. One eyebrow raised. "That trim's been peeling since 2009. It can wait another decade." "Maybe," he said, "but I can't." She didn't move, didn't open the door any wider. "You know, most people wait for an invitation." Lucas simply leaned slightly to the left and peered around her. "Looks like the paint's practically begging for help." She sighed, stepped aside. 1 hour. He gave her a little salute and walked in like he belonged there. Elena brewed her tea and retreated to the kitchen table while Lucas sat up by the living room windows. She could hear the sound of a brush swiping against wood, soft, rhythmic, oddly soothing. He didn't talk much while he worked, which surprised her. She'd expected more questions, more chatter, more prying into her life. But instead, he painted in silence. That was fine by her. Except it wasn't silence, not really. Every so often, he hummed a song under his breath, something low and easy like a lullaby. He tapped his brush against the rim of the can, in time with it. Elena found herself listening instead of reading. "You always hum the same tune?" she asked, finally annoyed with herself for breaking the quiet. Lucas smiled without turning around. "Only when I feel at ease." She stared at the back of his head. "You feel at ease here, I do," he said. "It's peaceful. The house, it feels like it's holding its breath." She frowned. "That's not a compliment. I didn't say it was." He turned around, wiping his hands on a rag. "But it's also not a bad thing. Sometimes a house just needs someone to breathe into it again." Elena set her mug down harder than necessary. "This house doesn't need anything." Lucas didn't argue. He never did. He just nodded and went back to painting. By the fifth Friday, Elena had stopped pretending she didn't expect him. She still didn't smile when he knocked, still didn't open the door with warmth, but she had unconsciously started leaving the porch light on. And when he arrived that week with a new screen door to replace the old one that squealed like a dying bird, she only grumbled half-heartedly before letting him in. "Your neighbor says you used to edit big-shot writers," he said, laying out his tools. "Anyone I'd know." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Robert Vance." Lucas blinked. "Wait, the guy who wrote The Iron Orchard?" She nodded. Lucas gave a low whistle. "That's serious stuff. That book made me cry in public." Elena smirked despite herself. "You cried in public?" "I have layers," he said, mock-wounded. She shook her head, sipping her tea. "Robert was brilliant, but a nightmare to edit. He thought every comma was sacred." Lucas grinned. "So you're saying you're responsible for his success?" "I'm saying he'd still be ranting in his garage if I hadn't cut 60,000 words from his first draft." Lucas chuckled and stepped back to admire the doorframe. Sounds like you used to be someone. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. I'm still someone. He held up his hands. Didn't mean it like that. Just sounds like you had a life you were proud of. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the bookshelf to a photo that sat slightly tilted. Behind a stack of old paperbacks, a man with gray at his temple, smiling with his arm around her. That smile still hurt to look at. I did, she said quietly. And then I didn't. Lucas didn't pry, just turned back to the door screws in hand, but his movements were slower now, gentler. Later that afternoon, as he packed up his tools, he asked, "Can I ask you something, though?" He laughed. "I'll ask anyway." She rolled her eyes. "Fine. Why do you let me come back every Friday?" Elena considered him for a long moment. "Because you fix things and because I don't have the energy to argue every week." Lucas nodded, accepting that answer. "Okay then, I'll keep showing up. One thing at a time." She watched him walk down the steps and back to his truck. He waved once before getting in. She didn't wave back, but she stayed at the door until his taillights disappeared. That evening, she found herself staring at the clean trim around the windows, at the way the new screen door opened, without a sound, at how somehow the house didn't feel like it was holding its breath anymore. And when she climbed the stairs to bed, she really noticed that she wasn't thinking about what was broken for once. She was wondering what he might fix next. It had been raining since dawn. Thick, unrelenting sheets of water blurred the view from Elena's front window, turning the world beyond into something distant and watercolor soft. She held her tea in both hands, listening to the storm like it was a stranger knocking soft but persistent. She told herself he wouldn't come today. No sane person would. The rain was punishing the gutters, overflowing the wind, sharp and rude. She should have felt relieved, but when 10:05 arrived and the doorbell rang, she didn't even pretend to be surprised. Lucas Reyes stood on her porch, soaked to the bone and smiling like he hadn't noticed the storm at all. His hoodie was dark with rain curls of wet hair stuck to his forehead, and under one arm he held a toolbox, under the other a brown paper bag. "You're late," Elena said flatly, even as she opened the door wider. Lucas stepped in without hesitation, tracking little puddles onto the mat. "I brought muffins." She blinked. "Muffins and light bulbs." He lifted the toolbox. "Your hallway looks like a horror movie." Elena arched a brow. "It's called ambiance. It's called dangerous." She exhaled slowly, then closed the door behind him. "Fine, but wipe your feet, and I'm keeping the muffins." "Fair trade," he said, grinning. By mid-morning, Lucas was on a stepladder in the hallway, swapping out the dead bulbs for warm, soft ones. Elena stood a safe distance away, a dish towel in hand, arms crossed. "You really shouldn't be up there alone," she muttered. "You fall and break your neck. I'm not dragging you out." "No tid," he said, balancing with a screwdriver between his teeth. "Though I like to think if I died here, you'd at least tell people I died heroically." "Fixing my hallway light is not exactly heroic. It is," he said, twisting the new bulb in place. "If you've seen how dark this place gets at night." She huffed a reluctant laugh. "You're ridiculous." He stepped down and tested the switch. The hallway glowed. "Elena Marks, welcome back to the 21st century." She stared at the light. It was warm, soft, not sterile, and somehow it made the old photos on the wall look more alive, less like relics and more like pieces of a life. "Thank you," she said quietly. Lucas didn't gloat, just smiled and reached for the next bulb. Later, they sat in the kitchen, made tea steaming between them and the paper bag open with 2 lemon poppy seed muffins inside. "I always thought you'd slam the door on me," one Friday, Lucas said, breaking off a piece of muffin. "You're still not off the hook," Elena replied, sipping her tea. "I know." He leaned back in the chair. "But you haven't. Not yet." She watched him carefully. "You want credit for being persistent? I want credit for seeing something worth staying for." Elena stiffened slightly. "Careful, Lucas." He held up his hands. "I just mean, you're not as invisible as you think." She looked down at her mug. "Some days I wish I were." "I don't believe that," he said gently. "Not really." They sat in silence for a few moments. Rain tapped against the window. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, not because it was crowded, but because the space between them felt charged. Lucas's voice dropped to something softer. "You know, most people don't scare me." "Oh, I scare you a little," he admitted, "but in the way thunder does." You know it's powerful, but it doesn't mean it's dangerous. Elena gave a tiny smile. That's a poetic way of saying I'm difficult. You're not difficult, Lucas said. You're grieving and still standing. That's something. She studied him. No sarcasm, no flirtation, just the calm, steady truth of his eyes. It made her throat tighten. You remind me of someone, she said, surprising herself. Lucas tilted his head. Your husband? No, she murmured. Myself, a long time ago. He said nothing, but his gaze held hers, kind open. That evening, after he left with promises to come by next Friday to check the basement, Elena wandered the hallway again. The lights hummed softly overhead. The photographs, her wedding day, her first editing award, her parents long gone, stood proudly on the walls. She stopped at one in particular, a photo of her in her 30s, mid-laugh arms around a group of writers during a retreat. She was vibrant, sharp-eyed the Elena before. She touched the frame lightly, not with grief, this time with curiosity. Lucas had said she wasn't invisible. For the first time in years, she wondered if that might be true. And somewhere deep in the back of her mind, that old editor's instinct stirred again, the one that whispered, this chapter isn't over. Friday came with golden light. After weeks of rain, the sky finally cleared, and Elena found herself standing in her hallway as sunlight streamed through the window beside the door. She hadn't realized how dusty the glass was until now, until the light exposed all the things she'd stopped noticing. She wiped the window clean. At exactly 10 Borges, Lucas knocked, no doorbell this time, just a gentle knock, as if he knew she was already there on the other side. She opened it. You're early, she said. I'm on time. You brought tools again. Basement light, he said, holding up his bag. And your mailbox is crooked. My mailbox is fine. He shrugged. I'll be the judge of that. Elena didn't argue. She simply stepped aside and let him in. In the basement, Lucas fixed the light and tightened the squeaky hinge on the water heater cabinet. When he came back upstairs, he found her sitting on the couch, a photo album open on her lap. He paused in the doorway. That's new, he said gently. Elena glanced up. I wasn't sure I'd ever look through this again. Good memories. Some others hard. She turned a page, but all of them real. Lucas sat beside her, close, but not too close. I'd love to hear one. She hesitated, but then she pointed to a picture of a younger her standing beside a man with sawdust in his hair and the proud smile of someone who had just finished building something. That's me and Sam, she said. He built the bookshelves in this house the week we moved in. Refused to buy prefab. Stubborn, elaborately so, she smiled. He used to say anything worth keeping deserves a solid foundation. Lucas glanced around. He wasn't wrong. They sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was shared. Then Lucas noticed something on the shelf, a book wedged too far back with a torn paper bookmark sticking out. He stood, pulled it out, and handed it to her. What's this one? Elena took it with a slow inhale. That's the manuscript. The one I never finished editing after he passed. Lucas blinked. You kept it. I couldn't bring myself to open it. It felt wrong to keep working after everything stopped. He sat back down beside Ibro. What if it wasn't about finishing it for them, but for you? She held the book like it was heavy, not in weight, but in memory. Maybe, she whispered. I don't know. Lucas studied her face. You want to do something wild. She blinked at him. Go out with me. For air, for sun, for coffee. You mean leave the house? Yes, he said. Just for a bit. She almost said no, though the word was right there. It was always there. But instead, okay, she said softly, but only for an hour. Lucas smiled like she'd given him the world. They walked 2 blocks to a small cafe with a green awning and cracked wooden chairs. The sun was warm and birds hopped across the sidewalk. Elena wore sunglasses and a cardigan, her hair pulled back. Lucas held the door for her. They sat outside, shared a slice of apple tart, and talked about things that had nothing to do with the past. He told her about his teenage obsession with space documentaries. She told him about a writer who used to turn in first drafts written in crayon, swearing it was part of his process. Elena laughed freely, unguarded, and Lucas just watched her, not like someone watching a show, but like someone watching the sun come back after a long storm. When they walked home, she didn't flinch when he offered his arm for balance on a cracked sidewalk. She took it, and for a brief moment, their steps aligned like they'd been doing this for years. At her doorstep, she turned to him. Next Friday. I was hoping you'd say that, he said. I have a plan. She narrowed her eyes. Should I be worried? Always, he teased, then added more gently. You'll like it. She nodded, then before she could overthink it, she said something she hadn't said in a long time. Thank you, Lucas, for not giving up. He didn't say anything clever this time. He just said, you're welcome. That night, Elena sat on the floor beside the coffee table with the manuscript spread out before her. She lit a candle. She read the first page, not to finish it, but just to see if the words still spoke to her. And slowly they did, one sentence at a time. The next Friday, Elena opened her front door before Lucas even knocked. I was early, he said, surprised. I know, she said, stepping aside with the faintest smile. I was waiting. He followed her into the house, and for once she wasn't wearing her usual cardigan and guarded expression. Her hair was loosely tied soft at the sides of her face, and there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there weeks ago. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something baking. Are you expecting company? He asked, stepping into the living room. I suppose I am, she replied. On the table sat a plate of scones, 2 mugs, and a manuscript neatly stacked with fresh notes scrawled in the margins. You started working again, he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. She nodded. I didn't realize how much I missed it, editing, thinking about someone else's story again, helping shape it. Lucas glanced at the marked-up pages, but it didn't. No, she looked at him. It just went quiet. They sat together on the old love seat, scones and hand tea between them. You said last week you had a plan, Elena said. I did. Lucas grinned. Still do, but only if you're up for it. Depends what it is. He pulled out a folded envelope from his jacket and handed it to her. She opened it cautiously and stared. It was a flyer for a weekend workshop called Repairing with Purpose Classic Car Restoration for Beginners. She blinked. You signed me up for this, as he said. It's 2 days just outside the city. You told me Sam loved to build things, and I know you haven't driven the Mustang in years. Her eyes widened. You remembered that it's sitting in your garage like it's waiting for someone to remember it exists. Elena didn't speak for a long time, her fingers touching the edge of the flyer, her mind spinning in places she hadn't let it go in years. I'm not who I used to be, she said finally. No, Lucas said. You're stronger now, softer too in the best way. I'm also 16 years older than you. You say that like it's the most important part of who you are, Lucas said gently. It's not. She looked at him uncertain. I don't need easy, Lucas said. I need real. And you're the most real thing I've felt in a long time. Elena swallowed. What are we even doing, Lucas? He reached for her hand. We're making something slowly with care, like anything worth keeping. Her heart beat hard in her chest, but it wasn't a panic. It was hope and a strange, tender joy she hadn't dared feel in years. Okay, she whispered. Okay to the workshop. She laughed softly. Okay to all of it, to trying, to not being alone if I don't want to be. His fingers closed around hers. You'll never have to be alone again, Elena. Not if you don't want to be. Later that weekend, Lucas helped her roll the Mustang out into the driveway for the first time in 5 years. The dust was thick. The tires were flat. The paint had faded at the edges. It looks terrible, she said, shielding her eyes from the sun. It looks like potential, Lucas replied. And she saw it then too, not just in the car, but in herself. Months later, a photo sat on the shelf beside the restored manuscript, Elena in Lucas' arms speckled with grease, beaming beside the newly painted Mustang. The photo was framed, the hallway was bright, and every Friday, rain or shine, he still showed up. But now she let him stay for as long as he wanted. The story of Elena and Lucas offers a deeply moving lesson. Healing from grief is a quiet, persistent process that blooms through small, intentional acts of connection. Elena, barricaded in her solitude, resisted Lucas's presence, yet his unwavering Friday visits, fixing her sink, her porch light, her world showed that love and care can seep through even the most guarded walls. This teaches us that we don't heal by erasing loss, but by allowing others to stand beside us, not to repair us, but to witness our strength. Lucas's patience, seeing Elena's resilience beneath her pain, reminds us to look beyond surface cracks to the beauty within others. Elena's gradual return to editing, her laughter, and her willingness to restore the Mustang reflect the courage to reclaim life one step at a time. Their bond, built on mutual respect, despite their differences, underscores that real relationships thrive on presence, not perfection. This story is a heartfelt call to show up for those who seem closed off, to nurture hope, and to trust that even a silent heart can find its voice again. What did Elena and Lucas's journey teach you about patience, grief, or connection? Have you ever found hope through someone's quiet persistence? Share your stories in the comments. We're eager to hear your thoughts. If this tale touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join our community of storytellers. Your support keeps these emotional narratives alive, so don't wait, subscribe now, and let's continue exploring the power of human bonds together.